Thinking about right now is pest management. And my name is Dave Myers again from Anne Arundel County Extension. And so I'm going to just kind of give a general overview of some of the pests that you can expect in the vineyard and insect weed, of course, is what we're going to focus on, and the vertebrate pests like birds and raccoons and deer and all those. And we certainly will have those, won't we? So let's go ahead and it is all about, it really is an integrated approach, and so there's a lot of different terms now, whole plant systems, care systems, IPM. You'll see a lot of different buzzwords for this, integrated crop management, ICM. But it is all about including everything up front before we go at it something hard with a pesticide, or, we really do, cultural practices really matter. And Ben talked an awful lot about things like site selection, site preparation, soil management, all those things we kind of covered today. They kind of all come together. And the problem with pest is that they can steal it all. You can go through all this effort and all that time commitment that you put into it and walk away with zero. And so that's where we have to really be on our game when it comes to pest management. So let's kind of think about that. And so we're going to focus mainly on weed management and insect and vertebrate controls. And so really we are looking for, perfection, I think. Uh-oh, that didn't look good, did it? Let's try that again. It didn't like that slide, did it? We'll go quickly on to another one. Well, we really are, we're thinking in our mind perfection. And in reality, perfection is very difficult. I think you've kind of heard that undertone, that just getting those quality grape parameters that we're looking for each season in Maryland is enough of a hurdle. So having perfection out there is that romantic side, I think, of grape production when it comes to what things look like on a day-to-day basis. But I think it really says it well. You've got to be in that vineyard, and you've got to be devoted to it, I think, to really get to where you need to be on top of the pest management. And a lot of things can go wrong. I mean, the first thing I look at is I'm a farmer. I've always been a farmer, right? I hate trees. I'll admit it. I need therapy. Trees are not your friend when it comes to ag production. And so if you're in the proximity of a wood line and you're putting a vineyard in, you need to get right in there. I say get the bush hog in there and hire the best wood management crew that you can come up with, and whack that hedge line back. And not only that, those roots, as far as if you were to drop that tree over in the field, imagine those roots, however far that tree fell, are in your field, robbing you. Okay. Now grapes are pretty good once they're established of living in that fringe, but you can see the impact of having the pressure from not just insects and disease, but nutrient and also invertebrates like birds and things like that. So you really do need to back off the wood line and really think maximizing airflow, maximizing sunlight. And we do have some strategic pests to really be concerned about. Grapeberry moth is one of those ones. We need to know and predict, in our area. We talk about growth degree days and things, knowing exactly when these cycles of these insects are likely to occur, and be scouting, right? And putting traps out there, sentinel traps to catch them, pheromone traps, grape root borer. Again, just some nice visuals of what's in that little booklet if you purchase one of those booklets. And knowing when these borers are active and that they look like a bee, right? They look like a larvae inside, that typical flat-headed wood-borne larvae inside the plant, but the bee is what you're really looking for, okay? And you can mistake that for a wasp, in fact, it's a moth. It's not even a wasp at all. They just mimic the bee to make it look threatening. And that's the one you can hold in your hand and give to your child and say, and really have fun with them, right? They can't sting you at all. Japanese beetles are only really problematic when you're starting out a vineyard. So if you're starting out a vineyard, be on top of the game with Japanese beetles. The goal is to get that cordon established the first year, right? And if you want both those bilaterals to be robust and bigger than your pinky, then you don't want defoliation from Japanese beetles, right, when they're really putting out that permanent wood for you. So that might be the only time you really have to spray Japanese beetles. After that, once you have an established vineyard, in southern Maryland, we kind of like when they're eating and chewing on the top of the vineyard, because that just means more sunlight and less leaf pulling and pruning for us, right? So, so they actually become helpful at that part of the vineyard's development. Stink bugs, we kind of, thankfully, we've got natural predators that have come in on the brown marmorated stink bug now, and That's not nearly as problematic as we anticipated it was going to be in vineyards, but it's still something to think about. And know what these things look like when they're juveniles. You know, there's your brown marmoset stink bug juvenile. Spotted wing Drosophila, you know, that really was a game changer because of this tail saw that the female has, that ovipositor, actually is a saw. And used to be, we think of fruit flies as only inhabiting pretty much ripe, rotten fruit. They kind of wait till it almost is ready to become vinegar. And that's when they would typically lay their eggs, right? In fact, vinegar is how you catch them. The problem with the spotted wing Drosophila is that they attack young fruit. And so they can turn perfectly good fruit into that early rotting. And so we have to be really on top of the game. This really is a game changer as it comes to fruit flies. So we need to know how to recognize that spotted wing and know how to recognize these insects early on in the young fruits. That's a fairly recent phenomenon for us. We never had that problem. So another one of those invasives. We're worried about the spotted lanternfly, and I've seen some Riker mounts that have went around the room. So to me, that's probably scariest for grape growers, I think. You know, so just listening to the tales and seeing some of the horror already to the north, that's not something we want. Here's ladybird beetles on this side over here, and getting into the fruit. And what did Joe say? I think he said like 11 of them per lug or something means that it was, maybe it was less, was all it took to taint the wine to such a scale that it would be basically non-usable. Okay, so it doesn't take very often, see how they hide in the grapes? So again, unless you're spraying specifically for them, they're going in the lug, right? And they'll stay hid down at the bottom of that lug, get dumped into the, you know, process. And next thing you know, you have too many of them there, you lose your wine. And remember, they're different than the ladybird beetle, right? Although they're similar, they're more, ladybird beetles don't eat grapes, okay? They eat other insects, right? So if you know it's not a ladybird beetle when they're inside your grapes, feeding away, that's a different species. Phylloxera, and then they feed on the roots, but then they cause this galling that's very telltale. And then leafhoppers up here. And so we've got leafhoppers typically are not too troublesome, but we do want to watch for them very close. They can actually put a lot of pressure on young vines. Of course, the ladybird beetles are beneficial, so we want to make sure we know the difference between the two. You know, weeds. I'm a weed scientist, and so to me, there's nothing better than, you know, that beautiful vineyard, and the weed control is good, and, you know, it's pedestrian friendly and good air movement, and all those things kind of coming together. And everyone has the idea that they're going to hoe and they're going to mulch and they're going to do all these different things, and they're not going to use herbicides. And but I guess eventually, when they get beyond 2 to 3 acres or more, they start thinking about those herbicides more seriously. So anyway, there's some really good chemical approaches to weed control, as well as other approaches. But I guarantee you that it will become your biggest problem. Other than disease management to getting quality grapes, weed control will be your biggest problem out there. And it's something that will be relentless, especially early on. The reason why that is think about how grapes grow. They pretty much have sunlight hitting the soil all the time. Now, I was a dairy farmer, and I grew soybeans and alfalfa and corn and all those crops. Once you close the canopy, the weed problems go away. And most of those crops close the canopy in 6 weeks. But you never close the canopy to sunlight hitting the floor at your grapes. Okay, and that means that you're always under continual weed pressure. Okay, so you put pre-emergence products down to buy you 6 to 8 weeks at a time, right? They don't last forever in the soil. And so really, if you're thinking about a weed control program from a herbicide standpoint, you're probably thinking a minimum of 3 sprays a year, probably 5, okay, with some post in that. So it's a little bit more than you might think right now. You're not going to go out there in the spring of the year, throw one pre-emergence out and say that's enough. So again, kind of think about that. Now we can go herbicide strips, probably the easiest. We can get into mechanical weed control. That can work, except it does degrade the soil and lose organic matter, and mainly leads you to erosion. Most of the time we plant grapes on a slope. The last thing you want is gully washes down through your vineyard rows and exposed roots and all those kind of things. And so I've seen it where the trellis is coming out of the ground because it's gully washed down the row. So, and then of course, ground covers. Now, I do believe ground covers are helpful maybe going into the winter period. I do not like them in the summertime because I see too much crown gall. And so again, that's another caution. You know, we might want to have these living covers and things, but always keep in mind, never forget crown gall. Just always put that in your mind, because you'll find that's a very difficult challenge in itself. So most of the time, most of our vineyards in Maryland will probably look something like this: well managed, a little herbicide zone, good turf in between, takes a lot of pedestrian traffic, you know, very well positioned shoot system. So again, this is after leaf fall. Looks really nice, you know, so you know someone was very diligent about that. Of course, it can look like that too. And that's usually, you think about this money you're getting ready to invest. And, you know, let's go back, this or this. So again, I'm not going to say it can't be done by hand. But like I say, I've farmed my whole life. I remember my grandfather, we hoed a lot. And I remember going looking across a 10-acre tomato field and say, we're going to hoe that today. You know, and I'm thinking, it's a lot easier for you to look at that, you know, kind of post and say, we can keep up with that. So your weeds, get to know them very well. You've become familiar with the annuals, the perennials that you have. Identify your weeds, right? So again, so that you know what you need to control out there. And think about, you got typically two kind of grasses and broadleafs, and the kind of your herbicides kind of work that way in a lot of ways. Broadleaf control, grass control, especially your post-control products. And of course, pre-emergence is very important. When you think about a pre-emergence herbicide, what you're doing is you're putting the chemical down before the weeds germinate. So it's pre-emergence to the weeds, right? And so you're going to prevent small-seeded grasses and a lot of broadleaves with a pre-emergence product. You need a narrow band of herbicide in the soil at about an inch to an inch and a half deep. And you need enough concentration there that when those seeds germinate, essentially taking the material, it's selective, and it kills them at that point. So that's what a pre-emergence does. They have to be in place at the time of germination, and again, they have to be in that soil for a long enough period of time to go through the duration of germination. And so hence pre-emergence products. Early spring is usually I think of a dormant application, then a spring, early summer application as being your pre-emergence timing. You can also do it in the fall. And then you're going to go on with post-emergence products to do cleanup. And so it's kind of a way, post-emergence, the weeds already emerge, you identify it, you use a broadleaf control product or a multiple or a grass control product exclusively, and you target those weeds. A lot of those particular herbicides, if they're broadleaf control products, have to be post-directed. You can't spray them on your vines, right? They have to be targeted to the soil. And so again, spray technique and all that gets into play. How many of you have looked at or how many are certified pesticide applicators in the room? Okay, not enough of you. I would encourage all of you to get the core manual and become certified pesticide applicators, okay? Because you'll learn and understand a lot about pest management from a standpoint of kind of an integrated approach and then using wisely and very prescriptively pesticides. So there's a core manual. In fact, I always keep it on my website, Anne Arundel County website, in a PDF form. The only difference between the National Core Manual and Maryland Core Manual is Chapter 13, which is the law chapter for Maryland. Okay, so you can look at the National Core Manual. It's identical to Maryland's, except if you go onto my website or other websites where you can download the Maryland version, MDA also has it on their website, you can get the Core Manual with the Chapter 13 Maryland law. Then you can, there's a practice exam in there. You can schedule time. I offer it, and my colleagues offer it around the state, different times, to sit and take the examination to become a certified pesticide applicator. I would highly encourage it because of the expertise that will give you to be more comfortable and a lot safer, I think, with the use of pesticides. Under the row management, again, you think about herbicide strips. The advantage is you're not tilling the soil, so you're not impacting the soil structure. You're not removing carbon. They are very low labor. It's kind of fun, actually, to spray herbicides. I don't know. I've always enjoyed it. You sit on a gator and you just ride along and mix up some chemicals and go out and you see the results. And so it's kind of from a standpoint, it's kind of like being an artist almost, I think. It's kind of like you see your handiwork. And they're fairly, results are very evident, very evident. Drawbacks would be the expense of the herbicides and the short-term effect that might be on the vines if you're sloppy out there, or maybe long-term effects. So we got to be careful, and we have to understand that too. Application means a lot of times not getting it on the vines, right? And so I do like those little, while you're learning how to spray, those little, at least the milk carton protection down there around the base. It's probably not a bad idea. And don't spray Roundup. That is the most self-inflicted injury I ever see in the vineyard. I mentioned that earlier, but it really is true. And we've talked a little bit about growth tubes. I kind of disagree with them, except for maybe something very short where you're making that spray herbicide application really directed very much at the base of that plant. So that's it. And we got some really fancy machinery out there for doing some kind of micro and environmental applications, wiper applications and things. And but it is, and the person here down here with the ATV has a little boom here that's actually targeting, just that little side. You only need about, I like to have about 2 foot on each side, so about a 4 foot strip sprayed area. So that gives you a nice area, and it's nice because gives you a nice walking space too, and nothing to stumble over, trip over, and then you still have plenty of turf in the middle to take the traffic of the machinery and that. Here's glyphosate injury 2 years later. So again, especially young vines are very subject to taking in even through the bark tissue and the latent bud tissue, getting systemically into the plant, and then glyphosate is Roundup. And it is, again, this is kind of what the damage looks like, and goes probably the most self-inflicted injury I see in the vineyard. The other under the row mechanical, again, minimal competition, no long-term effects on the vines. There is a hilling up effect, which sometimes makes it very, I think makes it a little bit, a little unpedestrian friendly, right? I don't like walking through the tilled area as much as I like that herbicide area. So that would actually be over the drawback, but I guess hilling up is an effect too for some, I would think out west. You know that around the Great Lakes, they actually bulldoze sand over their vineyards and then pull the sand back just so they can survive the winter. So that's kind of an interesting thing to do. Drawbacks is that as you do tillage, even shallow tillage, and then tromp through there, you really do crush the absorptivity and the soil structure. And so sometimes the water sheds off instead of going in. You kind of make basically kind of a pretty hardened surface. Labor and frequency of tillage. How many times would you have to till? I said you sprayed maybe 3 to 5 times. You probably need to do in most years, probably some kind of at least of every week to 10 days during the peak growing period. So it can really add up quickly the number of tillages that might be required. Tillage works really well in California because they don't see rain most of the time when they're growing the grapes in the summertime, right? So they can till and it can stay fairly dry and weed free, whereas we till and it usually encourages weed growth fairly rapidly. There are some other undercutting mechanical weed managements, and they're very good until you hit the vine. But they do have vine kind of control mechanisms in place, but it is something, and that's kind of what they're talking about by hilling and using weed control like that. And I can see where that, to me, I don't know that I would particularly like to work in that because of that uphill effect in the feet and the awkwardness of your feet working in there. But I can see where that would be an effective system. Talking about ground cover, we talked about that already. Ground covers are really important. And I do believe off-season ground covers probably would be less impactful than in-season ground covers. But that's something you certainly can do. And I would recommend there's some clover varieties that work really well. Durano clover is a very low-growing stoloniferous clover that spreads well. And so I would stick with something that stayed low to the ground, close to the ground, didn't minimize that airflow, and kept my crown or my graft union dry for crown gall. That would be pretty important. And they do improve soil health. So if you do have poor soil, incorporating covers would be a very good important part of that program too. And if you were only using non-residual herbicides, you could easily incorporate herbicides and ground covers. And then the ground cover can act as a weed barrier too. So I do a lot of no-tilling, so I understand the concept of covers and herbicides integrated. And so there are some really ways to integrate those covers into minimal use and maybe minimize herbicide use. So that's something that would certainly work. And there's some really pretty pictures of ground cover, that can be out there. Birds are really a problem. And it's amazing, you don't think you're going to have a problem, and then all of a sudden, maybe the first year or so, the birds haven't discovered you. But they will never forget you. When you establish that vineyard, and they know that now you're a fruit producer, they will always remember. And I know it has to be the same birds that come sailing in the same time of the year, waiting, thinking, okay, I have this stop here I have to make, and sail right on down and take your grapes. And so, all kinds of scare tactics out there, and they do work. There's been some pretty amazing things done to repel birds, but bird netting is probably where you're going to end up at. And so, that's another substantial labor and investment. But in most cases, I found that it's absolutely essential for our smaller vineyards to do. I remember talking to the New Jersey blueberry growers, and they say, well, we just let them have 20%. But it's the whole region of blueberries, and so they're kind of like, that's all they're going to give up. Our problem is if we have 10 acres out there, we'll probably give 100% to the birds. They won't be satisfied with just taking 20. And so that's the problem. Yes, sir.
You meant, let's say you just go right to the top of the fruit, you don't have to worry about the leaves?
Right, it's the fruit zone that all you're trying to do is protect the fruit. And so you're taking that first catch wire, attaching your net, and bringing it down under the cordon and attaching it. And you basically got that.
And what do the deer eat?
Well, the deer I haven't found as problematic, unless you're right on that hard wood edge, where there's plenty of deer. Then you're probably going to want to put a fence up on that. But fencing the vineyard would probably be the best thing for deer. But I have found that they typically do not like to go down the row. Now, maybe some people would argue with me, but they kind of find that confining. And they'll typically stay around the perimeter of the vineyards and eat most of that and not typically walk down those rows. Now, you see something, Joyce?
Well, there's some, if the bird netting is not well attached with using lots of clips, they can get up in there.
The deer,
yeah. I put up wildlife cameras at night, and I've seen them just all tangled in there.
Oh, the birds coming up inside. Oh, absolutely.
I'm talking about the deer in this case, but I was trying to convince this particular owner to put up a deer fence. It's just 2 acres of Vidal and Chamberson, and they would wipe out the first 3 rows of Chamberson.
Okay.
Every year. I figured out how much that he was losing in wine income could have easily paid for a deer fence.
Yeah.
So, but he didn't want to do it.
That's amazing.
And other owners of the property didn't want to hunt the deer, so they flourished and they had babies, etc.
And they get trained better each year. Yeah. That's incredible. And raccoons are problematic. There's a picture of a raccoon in an apple tree. But, you're going to want to put traps out for your larger invertebrates. And there's your deer, of course. And dogs are actually, a lot of people are using dogs to help with some of their pest control, so that's another opportunity they have in there. But deer fencing, again, sometimes if there's not much pressure, electric wire perimeter fence is usually enough for a couple acres, but once you get larger, they'll typically hop it, if they have a larger area to get into. And so I think really deer fencing, at least a single wire electric fence, only works up to maybe 4 acres at the tops. Yes.
If you go back to that, you said using dogs.
Yes.
Are the dogs out in the vineyard continuously?
A lot of them are. A lot of them will put housing in the production area so that they're there at nighttime when they need to be, and they're on patrol. And so that's how you're using those dogs.
In other words, a dog fence is cheaper than a deer fence.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And of course, then you can get into some substantial poly type fencing, and that's a pretty substantial deer fence there. So again, you can't exclude deer. Notice that deer, that's excessively high, and but they can jump an amazing, just come right up to something if you ever watch them. But they'd love to go. They would much rather go under. So pay more attention. Yeah, they pay more attention to they'll find any area where they can just if they can get their nose through there, they will push and get through, right? And they would always rather to go under a fence, and that's why you see it's kind of fortified down here. This is where you really got to control your fence activity. They've got if you got the poly wire, it has to all be stapled down in that poly fence. That's kind of that like real heavy plastic mesh, and they can be 7 to 8 feet, and that's probably ample height. But the main thing is that you make sure that it's well pinned into because they'll push under. That's where they're looking for the weakness is under the fence. And of course, it can really get ultimate there. That was pretty quick overview of pests, and you've had plenty on your plate today. But I hope you look forward to the rest of the meeting this evening. But again, my office is in Anne Arundel County. I really have had a great time working with vineyard growers and new vineyard operations as they've flourished. And I think about how quickly things changed. I wrote this little document I called. I showed you the vineyard reckoning document. That's how much I put into each hour and each penny that was put into our research vineyard over a 16-year period. And I also wrote this document called the vision document. And it was really amazing because you're after money, right? You write a vision document because you're after a grant. And so in 2001, Joe Fiola was we knew he was coming on board. And I talked with Ben Beal down in Southern Marin County. We're going to go after this grant. I'm going to write this vision document. We're going to get some money, and we're going to get a research vineyard. And so we put the first research vineyard at Upper Marlboro. It was actually planted before Joe got here. But we consulted with Joe and with Alice Wise and with Tony Wolf down at Virginia Tech, and we figured 27 different vinifera varieties that we wanted to try in Southern Maryland. And we formed a Southern Maryland vineyard team. And I just want to say that it was really a success. When I wrote that vision, I thought if I could just get 40 tobacco farmers, we were thinking about transitioning tobacco farmers, if I could just get 40 of them to grow 5 acres and it all went into a bottle of wine, they would make as much money as the tobacco industry was making at that time. And I'm thinking, wow. And I thought, man, that's really pie in the sky. That's grasping, I almost felt like if I wrote that, I'm going to end up in the guillotine someday. But lo and behold, it worked. And I look now at Southern Maryland and I think, Calvert County leads in wineries in the state. And just mind-boggling. And I look at all the development in Southern Maryland, and now I know that, the potential for this industry was great then when we had 12 wineries and we're over 100 now. And it seems like the potential's still there for growth. And so I see every year of new grape growers, and I think, wow, it is pretty exciting to be part of this amazing industry from its kind of early years to now. And so I think it is exciting industry you're getting into. So enjoy that part of it, because you'll look back someday and say, yeah, wow, you can accomplish some pretty amazing things. Even a little old state like Maryland could do some pretty amazing things. So that's it, you guys have. Enjoy your evening.